Hey man, yo kakampe Africano.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Conversations in Black. I'm Jared Quill, your host. For this conversation, we're pleased and happy to have Miss Celina Caesar-Chavannes, a businesswoman, but for our purposes here, she was a former Liberal MP for Whitby and Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau. But most importantly, we will be talking to her about the need for more young Black Canadians to be involved in the political process. We will talk about the issue of empty symbolism, token allyship, and the urgency of now, and especially what advice and lessons she might have for us who are, or some of you want to be involved in our country's political process. So without further ado, let us welcome and thank Ms. Chavannes for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation and about the energy that young people bring to our democratic process. So I'm hoping that these conversations that you're having translate into more activism and in a continued engagement among young people who have tremendous capacity and power to really change the world.
All right, thank you very much. So before we get into the core of our subject, I always ask about why you chose politics because I know you're in the private sector. If I'm not mistaken, you had a neurological research firm. So, yes. I mean, very educated and all that. You were living your private life. At what point you said, okay, let me get involved in at least, I mean, I'm not talking like politics. We all some political in some form, but in electoral politics, why you decided to be involved?
So there's the long answer and the short answer. So I'll give you the short answer. And really, I was doing my executive MBA. I have an MBA in healthcare management and an executive MBA. Mm-hmm. I did them both 10 years apart. And in 2013, when I was doing my executive MBA, after running a very successful healthcare research management firm, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next with my company. And during this program, there was a politics component, and they talked about political capital, the way in which business can help to inform policy, the way in which government can help business in terms of their strategies and their priorities. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really interesting. I was never really politically engaged. So, I watched it on TV, but I never took a poli-sci course, never really volunteered, never did any of that stuff. And I thought, man, this sounds interesting. The work that I was doing just before politics was co-chairing Canada's first national epidemiology study on neurological conditions and looking at the ways Alzheimer's, Parkinson, epilepsy, and other neurological conditions and disorders impact not only the person, but the caregiver. And you really get to see a sense of how policy based on research can really impact people's lives. And I thought, yeah, I'll run. I could inform policy. I could use this data to inform policy. And so I thought, I'll do it.
All right. Perfect. Thank you very much. And because I'm a bit learned about politics, so I was following since you were elected in 2015. So, and then we saw, like I read one story how on the Hill you sort of were prevented from accessing your own office.
Yes.
The way just in terms of equity, inclusion within let's just say the political body in itself in Ottawa. So if you can tell us what challenges you faced as a woman politician, but especially a Black woman politician, and like what advice you have for us or any young Canadians wanting to get in so that they know what they'll be facing coming in.
Right.
You can share that with us.
For sure. So the reason that that story and I shared my story was very intentional and very deliberate. I wanted to make sure that the next person who walked into those doors after me wasn't surprised that someone who could be an elected official and the parliamentary secretary to the leader of a G7 country would face microaggressions and racism on pretty much a daily basis. And so, yes, even I was in politics for 4 years, the only Black female member of parliament, 1 out of 338 individuals. And being in there, one of the stipulations of security is to memorize or recognize all elected officials in the event there is an emergency. And the fact that as their job, they couldn't recognize the one face that was different. Like you look at all the other ones, there's one dark chocolate female. You cannot recognize that girl. Like you cannot recognize the femme noire. Like that for me didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense that this was their job. So I felt like, so if there's an emergency, they're gonna push Celina out of the way and run to save the white guy. So I had to put those stories out there. I wanted people to know the reality of what I was facing while I was there. And it comes to the point where even the last day, the day I'm packing up my office, I'm getting ready to leave, and I left sitting as an independent member of parliament. I did not stay with the Liberal Party. I sat as an independent. And on the last day, my husband and I went to my office because he was helping me take some boxes out. We were leaving. And on that last day, I was asked, "Can I help you, ma'am?" And I said, "You guys are not finished with me yet. I am still a member of parliament, and I still have access to all the buildings on this precinct. A few more months and you could forget who I am. But as of right now, still a member, and you need to remember who I am." And that is important because we need to tell these stories. The shame of racism, the shame of microaggressions, any more than the shame of sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, or any kind of discrimination does not fall on the victim. The shame is not mine. The shame is on you. So why can't I tell those stories? Why can't I be explicit about my experience while I was there? Number one, to raise an awareness, but number two, to make sure that any girl who looks like me, any woman who looks like me, any person with intersecting identities who comes in after me does not have to face the same barriers and is not surprised by the barriers that they face.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those words. And in terms of this idea, because us as Canadians, we have, because people always say, well, it's not as bad as United States. We have a tendency of looking down south to absolve us of our own issues that we have here. I mean, I can remember even like since elementary school and in high school, like in terms of history lessons, like no mention of even like Africville, you know, the whole heritage of. And I was talking to a friend, I was telling him like, yo, for a long time in Ontario, even like schools were segregated, like Black Canadians kids were not allowed in terms, even like with like Queen's University and McGill, some, you know, Black students were not allowed, but people don't know that story. So what happened is like, we get into explaining people and they're like, oh, you guys are importing American issues here in Canada, whereas we don't have those problems. So what can you say to those people saying that, oh, it's not as bad, it's not as, you know, segregated or as racist as the United States, you know, but like Canada, we're this melting pot, it's kumbaya, let's all have a hug and everything is good, you know, like what can you say to push back to that sort of official narrative about the image of our country?
So first, I didn't answer the second half of your previous question about what do people do who want to get in. Yes. And I put that in my resignation letter. I said, you need to run, but run in packs. Run like you're hungry for it. It can't be up to one person in there trying to make that change. It has to be a crew. You roll deep. You get your squad together and you run and you decide that you're going to make change. So the whole idea that it's not as bad in Canada, when I was Parliamentary Secretary for International Development, I made sure that I was promoting Canada's feminist international development policy around the world, which I strongly believed in. But every time I spoke about it, I was very clear on making sure that people knew that Canada had a long way to go towards achieving its own feminist goals. We don't have to look as further than missing and murdered Indigenous women to understand that women do not have equity in this country. We don't need to look further than the pay equity gap to understand that Black women won't get pay equity for the next 100 years. We don't have to look further than, our own individuals with intersecting identities to understand that feminism doesn't always fall to or isn't equal across everybody. Feminism for some to achieve success and to achieve what they need, for the most vulnerable and poorest in our societies who can't afford food, who are not making a living wage, that kind of feminism doesn't seem to befall them. So I was clear to speak to the fact that we still had a long way to go here in Canada. But because it's not as bad as the United States doesn't make it good. And we need to be very clear about that. And today I put out a message to the government of Canada about looking at their own self and their own capacity to be leaders in this moment, especially around mandatory minimums, especially around the fact that we haven't repealed that. We haven't expunged records for individuals who have simple cannabis possession. The cannabis is legal in this country, and we haven't expunged those. And we know that they disproportionately targeted and were surveilling Black and Indigenous communities, and that is a violation of our human rights. So the fact that we are overrepresented in prison systems is because the police, the law enforcement, was predominantly in our communities when they knew that in other communities they were smoking weed. But they chose not to go there so they could round us up and put us in jail, and now don't want to expunge the records. So when we look at, we don't have anything to worry about here in Canada. Yes, we do. Carding is still an issue. We are not safe as Black people. We are not safe, and we need to demand different. And just to speak about the education system, my husband, who is has his doctorate in higher education leadership, he tends to school me about the education system. And he actually told me this about our North American education system was heavily influenced by John Dewey, who was influenced by a German philosopher named Hegel. And Hegel said that the education is the art of making man ethical. And both Hegel and Dewey argued for liberatory possibilities of education. But Hegel also wrote that the continent of Africa is an unsubstantiated mass that has contributed nothing to civilization. He is the founder of our North American education system, his philosophies, and he knew that that was wrong, but he wanted to continue to prop up and justify chattel slavery. So he continued this lie. So if our foundation of our education system is built on a lie, is built on disease, don't you expect to see symptoms of that throughout the progress of education of Black children? Don't you continue to see how we're suspended at higher rates, how we are streamed into courses that won't allow our children to get the education that they need to compete in this global economy? There's a disease in the system, and we have to actually look at the root causes before we could ever address what's happening right now.
Yeah. So since you touched a bit about the PMO, because many young, especially because I'm young and I talk to young people so much, apathetic about the whole political process, really do not believe in politics as a way of bringing about real changes. And then now that we have the liberal government, just like you said, with all the promises, and so with changing the electoral process, and you said like mandatory minimum sentences and stuff. And I know because when I articled in criminal law, I was with a criminal defense lawyer, and I'd see we will do sentencing, and I'll see the impact on that on Indigenous and Black Canadians, and then the stats have shown that we're not prone or more likely to commit crimes than our white Canadians counterparts. So at some point, there's like the data's there. It's just we need to address those. But just this issue of now with this whole Black Lives Movement, now it's so convenient, and we sort of have this, yes, bending the knee, but at the same time with the whole history of blackface, but at the same time, acknowledging that there is systemic racism, but we're taking measures, but it's sort of vague which measures. We're waiting for concrete policies. So what can you say about this idea of, performative allyship, token allyship, sort of corporate allyship? Now that it's good, let's jump on the bandwagon of justice and equity, and just this idea of being empty rhetoric instead of backing it up with real actions and real policies.
So let's be clear. I think that the Black community, it's not that I think, the Black community is tired of the performative bent knee. It's tired of having the same conversations year after year after year, study after study of the same issues. The answers are there. Like you said, these criminal justice policies that are in place negatively impact Black communities at an alarming rate. And when we think about, in 2020, the Prime Minister taking a knee at a Black Lives Matter rally, but canceling his campaign promise of 2015 to repeal mandatory minimums, which we know have our brothers and sisters locked up in jail. I'm sorry, does that knee actually mean anything? Does it mean that there's going to be a change? Does that mean that you're actually reconsidering and going to put mandatory minimum back on the mandate letter of the Minister of Justice? Is that what it means? Because otherwise it just looks like you're kneeling in the street for no reason. The Prime Minister holds the pen on what happens with a lot of people in our country. The Prime Minister also holds the pen on the finances that go out to the people in our country, and they also holds the pen on the decisions made about who represents the country. So, repealing mandatory minimums has not happened. Expungements of records for cannabis possession have not happened, although cannabis is legal. The number of ambassadors that represent Canada around the world, I could count on one hand. The number of businesses, Black-owned businesses that provide goods and services to the government of Canada, I could probably count on one hand, but I'll give them a little bit and say I could count it on two. That need didn't mean anything if you're not going to back it up with action. And in 2018, the government of Canada decided that they were going to recognize the International Decade of People of African Descent under the pillars of justice, recognition, and development. Where's the justice? Where is the recognition? Where is the development possibilities? Don't take a knee if you can't do the work when you stand up. That's it.
Then what do you say to, because talk people even within the liberal circles and the Hill, they're saying that we sort of hear the same thing, like when a Black woman tried to voice her opinion, but you're sort of difficult to work with. You understand that government sometimes is, you need to, it's the groundwork, it's change takes, time. It's slow. Like, how do you respond to
Yeah.
that? Or saying that you're not a team
Yeah.
player, you're out for yourself. What can
wow.
you respond to that?
Yes. Oh, I love that. You know what? That is the common rhetoric when you talk about Black women. And let me tell you something. I'm okay with that because I'm not asking for these policy changes because they will benefit me. I'm asking for these policy changes because they're going to benefit our community. So all of a sudden, people are focused on how she's not a team player and how government takes a long time. Why is the focus on me? Isn't what I'm asking for what was in your campaign promises? Oh, but when Celina asks for it and demands it on behalf of her community, who I know is suffering, it's Celina's not a team player. Then I'll continue not being a team player. Fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. Because while you all waiting for somebody to be a team player, you know who pays for that? You know who pays for the fact that we're waiting for someone to be a team player? Our community does. When COVID hit, the money came out real fast. Government was able to turn on a dime real fast. Wasn't that true? Oh, but when it comes to us, we need to wait. Don't get fooled by the whole Celina's not a team player. This has nothing to do with Celina. This has to do with political will. And if the political will to make change is not there, and the political will to remove mandatory minimums will make us appear soft on crime and thereby not be able to get reelected, guess what happens to mandatory minimums? We're going to keep them on the books because we don't have the political will to do what is necessary for a community because we might not get reelected. This has nothing to do with Celina. This has everything to do with the incapability of a government to have the will to do what is right by our community, period.
Yeah, that's a good transition now that gives us the urgency of now. Why this is the prone moment, why we should act now, why we should be involved now. Because I was like, yesterday I was watching again a video by Jimmy Baldwin where he was talking about, time for progress. He was like, how many time do you need? Like, you've taken my parents' time, my brothers, my nephews, like how many time do we need before we can actually have equality and actually justice and equality for Black and Indigenous Canadians? So can you talk about why we should act now, why this is the moment, why young people, young Indigenous, young Black Canadians, young Black women should get involved in the political process? Why now?
Regis Kortinsky-Paquette, DeFonte Miller. You cannot. This is not about a time that we have to lose. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about their ability to live and experience their dreams and realize their full potential. You want to talk about Celina not being a team player. You want to talk about how government moves. These are people's lives. This is not a joke. What's happening in the United States with the public lynching and killing of Black? That's not a joke. That's not something we need to wait until you decide what happens. No, the time is right now. The time is now to act. Enough is enough. We're not begging. We're not begging. And it's time for us to decide that we're going to hold our political leaders to account. Again, this is not something that Celina has made up. For example, mandatory minimums. This was a campaign promise. This is not about me. This is not about, waiting. This is about dismissing a community that has particular needs. And there's no there's no more waiting. We, as a Black community, have had power for a very long time. It's time for us to use it. The threat to modern democracy, the threat to how political will ebbs and flows is the Black vote. And we need to recognize the power that we have in our community to make things happen.
And talking about the political power and exerting that political power, what do you say to this notion, in a sense, we have that the Black vote is sort of locked within the Liberal Party? That's why they feel secure, saying that, well, anyways, they won't go anyway. They always vote for, the Liberals anyway, because every time I have conversation trying to push back, I'm like, there's other parties, you can explore people like other parties are seen as racist, but the Liberals are this, or to some extent the NDP, but more the liberal welcoming, and you see more immigrant parents rhetoric will be, they let us in the country, they were welcoming, Canada was just beacon of hope. But that idea of our vote is held sort of like taken for granted. So what can you say to that notion of voting our interests, knowing that this is a quid pro quo? It's like I'm giving you my vote for a specific issue. How can you comment on that and expound more?
Yeah, but giving you our vote for a specific interest doesn't mean that for the 4 years in between, you're not held accountable. And so what, in 4 years, you're going to come back and say, I would like your vote for this issue again? So in 2015, you talked about issues that you wanted: last first past the post, repeal of mandatory minimums, all of these things. And in 2019, they haven't been done. They were omitted. So I understand the legacy of the Black vote to the Liberal Party. I personally don't understand why we pledge allegiance and just blindly vote. At this point, it doesn't matter what you vote. I won't vote against my community's self-interest, so I won't vote Conservative, especially now, and I don't vote NDP. However, we can't blindly decide to give our vote to the Liberal Party. If you're just blindly giving that vote without accountability, so I'll give you my vote, but I'm going to make sure that you're held accountable. I'm going to make sure that I'm speaking to what you need to do for that vote for the 4 years in between, if you last that long. So we cannot continue to blindly give the vote. I think that is where the difference is. We need to understand, yes, we are voting in our community's best interest, but at the same time, I'm going to hold you accountable to that vote, because that vote is my trust in you. And you need to earn that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, focusing on, I get back, strategies for young Canadians who want to run, and they feel like, hey, I don't have a sort of a brand name, a last name that is a Canadian brand name, or I don't have a profile in the community. I'm just sort of a member of my community. I just go about my business, but now I feel the urge to get more involved. What kind of strategy, groundwork, because you've done it successfully, you were elected. So what can be done now if someone has in the view of running, maybe in the next election or the one coming after that, what they can do on the ground to raise their profile and to make sure that they get enough support so that they can get elected?
So I think what people need to remember is that I was not a brand name in Whitby. Nobody knew who I was, to be honest. The person that I ran against was a member of council for 17 years, was the former mayor of Whitby, had a pretty big name in a community of 110 to 130,000 people over that time period. So I didn't have that kind of notoriety. What I did have was the capacity to go knock on doors, to speak the truth at those doors, and to convince people that I was their best alternative, that I was going to be a refreshing face in politics, and that I wasn't going to just be a bobblehead no matter what party I was running for. I made those commitments at the door. And that's why it was very easy for me to leave the Liberal Party and sit as an independent, because I knew that my accountability was to my community. It wasn't to the Liberal Party. They didn't give me a job. They didn't vote me in. It was the people of Whitby that voted me in. It was the people of Whitby that gave me a job. So I was accountable to them and them alone. And so making that commitment to the people that you serve is what galvanizes and creates that success. The other thing is that I did politics differently right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I did as many makeup videos as I did policy videos, because I like makeup and I like fashion. And when I did fundraisers, I didn't have stuffy fundraisers with little cut sandwiches and cucumbers. I threw fits on a boat, like a big soca fete. And you know what? Not only Liberals bought tickets, we had conservatives, we had NDPs, we had people who weren't even thinking about politics on that boat, fetting. No cameras, because what happens in the party stays in the party, and we had a good time. So when I left politics, the coffers were full. Mm-hmm. But I did politics differently. And I think that people need to take with them when they're going to run is to be yourself. Do not be fit into some pre-existing narrative of what Canadian politics looks like, because Canadian politics was not intentionally designed for people with intersecting identities. So me trying to fit into a political framework, liberal, conservative, NDP, or otherwise, doesn't make sense. So whereby I might have an affinity towards their policies, their framework is not designed to fit who I am. So I am going to be Celina within that establishment as much as possible. And if that turns out that people don't like me at the end, so be it.
Well, just to push back that representation, some said that the whole wave of Canada in 2015, you guys were elected really under the notoriety of Mr. Trudeau, and people wanted to get rid of Stephen Harper with all the years that we had. So that's why when few MPs raised, the voice their opinions or disagreement about policy issues or whatever, it was met with this kind of hostility, if I can use that word, because it was felt like the narrative out there was like, I made you, who you were.
Let me be clear.
I made you parliamentary secretary. I made
Let me be clear.
So how dare you come and stand up to me in that way? How can you respond to that?
So I'm met with hostility, and I'm supposed to be treated like a child by Justin Trudeau because what? He gave me a title? Come on now. Let me tell you, I earned that position. I earned that position. He didn't ask me to run. I decided I was going to run. I decided that I was going to knock on doors. I decided that I was going to use all my experience and expertise to be able to win this riding. Now, whether or not I rode on a Trudeau wave or not, I earned that spot to be there. And I earned the right to represent 130,000 people. So you do not earn the right to speak to me any way that you want. You do not earn the right to speak to me like a child. You do not earn the right to harass me. Since when is that okay? I'm supposed to sit back and accept that what? Because I'm supposed to be the nice Black woman who sits and is lucky that they're at the table? I'm sorry, that's not the role I play. Maybe some people could do that. Maybe to some people that's second nature. Maybe to some people that makes them feel comfortable. But to me, and as a representative and a person who is a Black woman, I would never want that for my daughters. I would never want that for other Black women. I would never want that for anybody in my community. I would never want that treatment for anybody that I represented in Whitby. So I would not take it for myself. I don't care what your title is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. All right, now moving forward, we just want to get an update. What you've been up to since you left politics, you went back to private practice. Are you going to run again? Should we expect you to be in the forefront again in terms of just activism and sort of community organizing involvement, or you be back into the political arena in the House of Commons? What's next for you, Ms. Caesar-Chavannes?
So I don't think I ever left the activism chair. Because the title isn't there. It doesn't mean that I'm not passionate about my communities and I can't make change. Titles don't make change, people do. So I haven't left that. I'm still very much active in that regard. What I'm doing now, I'm doing some consulting. I'm enjoying my retirement from political life. I finished my manuscript for my first book, which is an autobiography of my life. Including my time in politics. I am looking forward to the possibilities that the future has ahead. And whether that is re-engaging in Canadian politics or not is yet to be determined. But I always keep doors open because the universe has been very successful at blessing me. So wow. I'm good with that.
Wonderful. So now just to conclude, if you can, a word, a message for young Black Canadians watching moving forward, because now, I mean, we see that regularly in the social media, Instagram, whatever, that like those videos coming from the States and some videos also a bit from Canada. That's just reinforcing the trauma now we have to live through our social media, you know, the killing, the shooting, the carding, the harassment of everyday citizen. So for young Black Canadians feeling hopeless, feeling powerless, things will not change. This is just, you know, how it's going to be. This is just normal. We'll have to settle for this and just sort of bow our head down and just trying to move and trying to survive. What last word you can have for us?
To get involved, to run. But as I said in the beginning, run in packs. Get your squad, get your people, get your friends, and run. The power and capacity of young people to connect with each other and connect with a village, so they have that support system within their infrastructure, whether it's politics or business or otherwise. And outside of their political or business arena, that connectivity with their village is something that young people have a tremendous capacity to do. We are seeing it around the world in global protests. This is your moment. This is young people's moment right now to decide what the future looks like, to decide whether they're going to sit on their laurels and say, I give up, it's always been that way, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, or they're going to demand change. They're going to hold their elected officials to account. They're going to hold business leaders to account. They're going to hold franchises in which they occupy to account. And the only way that they could do that is by being their authentic selves within those spaces, not conforming, living their true identity, being who they are, and loving who they are. Because when you love who you are, you love your community. And there's nothing that you won't risk for your community when you love your community. There's no words of hatred or there's no words of discouragement that could be thrown at you that won't allow you to love your community and to give them 100% all the time. Because waiting is done. Waiting is dead. Waiting is so 2019. Now is about action. Now is about movement. Now is about upward mobility and progress for our community. And young people have the tremendous power to make that happen.
Well, This is it, folks. Miss, like we have AOC in the state. I feel like in Canada we have triple C's. So, Miss Caesar-Chavannes, thank you very much for. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. You know, I mean, for me, it's never about politics. It's always public service. I know it's hard to see sometimes, but thank you for serving. Thank you for your activism, and just thank you just for remaining there and speaking your truth and standing your ground. I think it was inspiring for a lot of us watching it from the outside, how it unfolded. So power to you. And once again, thank you very much for accepting to have this conversation with us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Hey man, yo kakampe. Africa.